When I was 20 years old, about 6 years ago, I worked as a delivery girl for a popular pizzeria in my area. Initially, I worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shift, but when the guy who delivered for the night shift ended up getting fired due to him losing his license because of a DUI, I was placed on the night shift since my boss hired a family friend who could only work my shift for whatever reason. I really didn't want this shift, because you never know if people who order late at night actually want a pizza or if they have other intentions in mind. Unfortunately, my boss was an asshole and essentially told me if I wasn't willing to work the night shift, I was fired. I wasn't exactly in a position where I could be out of work, so I reluctantly worked the shift. The first month of this shift went by without any issues until I had to deliver a pizza to a house that just barely made our delivery radius. I punched it in on my GPS and the house was located in a pretty suburban part of the city. I arrived, it's about 11 p.m. The block was extremely quiet, but decently lit, mostly littered with modern townhouses, but the house I delivered to was a duplex. I ring the doorbell and I wait for about 30 seconds. No answer. I ring it again and wait another 30 seconds. Still no answer. So now I'm standing there getting pretty nervous that something might go down. But thankfully, a man opens the door. He looked like he was in his late 40s and he was pretty tall compared to me. Maybe a little over 6 foot, but he was very skinny. I tell him that his pizza is here and he just stands there staring at me. I asked him if he was okay and he responded by saying, "Yeah, I'm fine, sorry. I got off work not too long ago and I'm zoning out a bit." Fair enough, I suppose. He hands me the money and I hand him the pizza. And as I'm counting the change, he says, "You're really beautiful, you know that." Not really thinking too much into it, I thanked him for the compliment and I gave him his change. I said goodnight and he did too. I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later, I get a delivery order to the same place. I head over there around the same time as last time and ring the doorbell. He answers the door again very excitedly and said, "Hey, it's you again, how are you?" I told him I was tired and can't wait to go home, to which he chuckled and said, "I know that feeling pretty well," as he was pulling out his wallet. As he was counting his money, he asked me what my name is. Being kind of tired at this point and not really thinking straight, I stupidly tell him my name. As I'm giving him his change again, he asked if he could have my number, as he'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as I am. Whoa, buddy, pump the brakes. I've literally only met this guy like twice to deliver a pizza. I had no idea who this guy was, and I'm positive he barely knew who I was as well. Another thing to mention is that I looked way younger than I was at the time. I was told by numerous people that I still looked like I was 15, and I was hoping he thought differently and wasn't hitting on what he thought was a teenager. So now I'm just standing there awkwardly for a few seconds before I muster out, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He gets upset and says, "Oh, okay, I see." We stand there in silence before I tell him to have a good night, and I walk back to my car. He says nothing and still stands at the doorway staring at me until he finally went back inside once I started my car. I got a pretty creepy vibe from this guy and I even brought it up to my coworkers and they agreed it was pretty creepy. Except for my boss who overheard everything and claimed I was making up stories to trying to gain sympathy for having to take the night shift. A week later, as I'm working the night shift and we get an order for the same guy again, this is when shit finally hits the fan. I arrived at the house around 10:30 p.m. and keep in mind that from my perspective on the road, it didn't look like a single light in that house was on. I get out of my car and I walk to the front door with a pizza box in my arms. As I'm approaching the door, it quickly swings open to reveal the man, except this time he was wearing a suit, and I jump back. He laughs and said, "Sorry if I scared you. I saw you out the window and figured I would just open the door now so you wouldn't have to knock." I was getting scared because, as I mentioned before, there were no lights on in the house. So was he sitting in the dark this whole time? And if so, why? I nervously laugh and say, "It's okay." He asked me if I liked his suit, which I said yes. He then asked me, "Would you like to go on a date with Lee tonight?" What the hell? I once again tell him I have a boyfriend, to which he chuckles, gets close to me and says, "Honey, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl." He then grabs a pizza box from me and throws it to the side and grabs me by my arms hard. I'm officially shitting bricks at this point and trying not to cry from the fear that was overwhelming me. I start pleading with him, "Hey dude, please, I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight." He just stares at me with the most sinister look I've seen on someone's face and says, "I don't care, get inside now, we're gonna have a good time." He starts trying to pull me into the house and I'm trying to resist as hard as I can. After a bit of struggling, he lets go of one of my arms and starts grabbing something out of his pocket, which I presume was a knife. That's when I did something that to this day I'm still thankful work as he was doing that. I used my freed arm to punch him as hard as I could in his stomach, which in turn stunned him for a few seconds, and he loosened his grip on me, allowing me to break free. I quickly run to my car, and as I get in, he runs at me and tries pulling me out of the car holding the knife in the other arm and even yells, "Why are you making this so difficult?" I grab a half-empty soda bottle I had in the cup holder and I throw it, and luckily it hits his head, and he lets me go. I slam the door, and then all of a sudden he jumps right on the hood of my car and starts scratching and banging on my windshield with his knife. I put the car in reverse and quickly back out of the spot and quickly reverse down the road, with him desperately trying to hold on. He's literally banging on my hood screaming, "Stop the car." I turn onto the next road as swiftly as possible, and luckily he falls off the hood of my car. I slammed the gas as hard as I could to get as far away from that sick bastard as I could. In my panic state, I drove a couple blocks down the street and kept making turn after turn onto other side blocks as I feared I was being followed. Eventually, I reached a red light and I slammed on the brakes and just sat on the intersection frozen from what just happened. I began crying and violently shaking as I was sitting there. It dawned on me that I came so close to losing my life, and I couldn't help but feel like I shouldn't have been alive. Once the light turned green, I pulled over to the side and I just continued crying. Eventually, I get the energy to drive back to the pizzeria, and almost immediately after I walk in, my coworker knew something was wrong after seeing me. I practically broke down in front of him, and everyone else came to the front wondering what was going on. I fought my tears and explained everything that had just happened as calmly as possible. My coworker comforted me, and my boss surprised me and began apologizing profusely for what had happened and for putting me on the night shift. He took me into the office and handed me the phone to call the police. They arrived at the store and I gave them my statement, as well as taking pictures of any marks on myself, as well as the scratches on my car from the encounter as evidence. My coworker followed behind me as I drove home, and I collapsed on my bed, and strangely enough, I managed to fall asleep. I was just that tired. I quit my job the next day, and luckily a friend of mine managed to hook me up with a new job at her clothing store. As far as that cycle goes, 2 days later I received an update from the police. The entire duplex was owned by the guy's brother, who lived on the right side with his wife, and his psycho lived on the left side of the duplex. I learned that he had been in and out of jail constantly, at first for robberies and assaults, but later on it was for sex crimes. He had been released from jail about 5 months before this encounter for having sex with a minor. When they arrived at the house, he was long gone, and his family had no idea where he ran off to, but the police insisted they would find him, and indeed they did, but not alive. I spent the next 2 months in fear that he would find me and finish what he had in mind. But the police contacted me and updated me on the case. Apparently, he fled to another city nearby and attempted to kidnap a teenager walking alone late at night on the street. Luckily, somebody happened to be looking out the window at the right time and called the cops, and the police caught him trying to force her into his car. He manages to flee and the police chase after him. He blew a red light near a busy boulevard and the van slammed right into the driver's side of his car. By some sort of miracle, the driver of the van only sustained minor injuries, while the psycho succumbed to his wounds long before the ambulance even arrived. I thanked the officers for everything they did and for informing me, and I walked out of the station. I walked down the street and I lit up a cigarette as I'm taking in everything I had just been told. I don't usually wish death on anyone, but after hearing about his death, I felt relieved. I felt relieved that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I was just relieved that I would never have to encounter him again, and that I wouldn't have to go through with charging him and reliving what happened that night. Who knows where I'd be if he managed to pull me into this house. This all went down in the summer of my 8th grade year. I was on my way to finally becoming a high schooler, and it was legit one of the best summers of my life. I had 2.5 months of no school until I was officially in high school. I used my time up mostly by playing video games, sleeping, or playing basketball with my friends. I was actually home alone for a whole entire week, and my parents thought I could hold down the fort. I was a relatively good kid and they trusted me. So to us as a family, it wasn't really that big of a deal. Besides, I had a cell phone, so if anything were to go wrong, I would have a way of calling someone for help. My dad also gave me access to one of his credit cards in case I were to get hungry and didn't want to eat what we had at the house. Really, I was stoked about having the house to myself. I've had people tell me that it was pretty messed up of my family to leave me alone for that amount of time, especially considering I was barely 14 years old. I don't really think so though. They didn't expect anything bad to happen and neither did I. It was a rare occasion as well that they were gone for so long. This wasn't something they did often. As a matter of fact, I still live with my parents now. And I'm 19 years old now. Ever since that day, everything went down. I haven't been home alone for more than 24 hours at a time. It was a Friday night around 11 p.m. when I heard my phone go off. I received a text message from an unknown number and all it said was, "Hey." I messaged them back and I asked who they were. They immediately became passive aggressive and were upset with me for not knowing who it was. I apologized to them, thinking it was someone I was close with. I did just get a new phone a few months prior, and I lost all my contacts, so I explained that to them, and they still seemed pretty upset. They started harassing me and I ended up thinking that they were just pranking me, so I turned my phone on silent and continued playing my PlayStation. I'm not sure how long after. Probably around 10 minutes or so, I would say. I heard a knock on my bedroom window. I thought I was just hearing shit at first, but I still decided to check and see who was out there just in case. I moved my blinds over to the side and I looked out the window, but I didn't see anyone. I wasn't convinced though. I knew I heard a knock and I was starting to become very paranoid. I looked through some of the windows throughout my house to see if I could spot anyone, but again there was nobody. I can't deny the eeriness though. It felt like something was about to happen, like something really, really bad. I took my phone out to call my mom and I had a bunch of notifications from that person that was texting me from earlier on. The most recent message said, "I'm here." I couldn't believe what I was reading that made my nightmares and everything I was feeling come to life. I went to call my mom and very quickly I realized my phone wasn't picking up any service, which was extremely unusual. I have really good cell phone connection, as does my whole family, especially at home, like we never run into issues with that. It was at this point I was literally terrified and I had no clue what to do. I had no way of contacting anyone and I knew I was absolutely screwed. I wanted to message that person back and tell them to leave me alone, but obviously I couldn't, considering I had no service. If you're wondering why I didn't use my Wi-Fi to send an iMessage, it's because the person texting me wasn't on an iOS device. I was pacing back and forth in my living room when all of a sudden I heard some noises coming from outside. I ran to the direction of which I heard the noise, which was toward the back patio, and I listened. Someone was screaming for help at the top of their lungs over and over. My heart began thumping out of my chest and my initial reaction was that it was a setup, but me being the kind of person I am and considering I took boxing classes for years and knew how to fight, I wanted to stick up for myself and whoever was potentially being hurt. I'm not going to lie, I was really wanting to beat the crap out of whoever was harassing me, plus I knew if I didn't do something now that something bad was likely to happen anyway, so I did the unthinkable. I walked outside to my back patio and it was silent. The only thing I could hear were the crickets chirping. I waited for a second until I yelled, "Hey, who's there? Hey, don't mess with me, man. You don't want to start something you can't finish," I said. Almost right after that, there was an extremely bright light flashing at me from afar. Our house sits on quite a bit of land, and we have a huge backyard with tons and tons of trees. Whoever it was pointing the light at me, clearly trying to piss me off. The light then began moving all around towards my direction at the house for a minute, then it turned off. Within an instant, the screaming picked back up again. It was the same voice pleading for help. I knew it was now or never. I ran back inside and into the garage and grabbed my old baseball bat as a weapon, and I made my way back outside towards the woods, heading directly where I first saw the flashlight. My heart was fluttering at this point as I wasn't sure what to expect. As I got closer and closer, my anxiety about doubled. I couldn't believe that I was in this situation, and I had a sudden realization that what I was doing was pretty stupid. Right when I was about to turn around to go back inside, somebody from the woods that I couldn't see said something to me. "Hey, over here, man." It was so dark that I couldn't see him or anything, barely for that matter. All I could see were the dark silhouettes of all the trees around me. "Who's there?" I asked. That was when the voice ahead of me whispered and told me to quiet down. He asked me to help him and he said he was tied up to a tree and that someone had kidnapped him. Obviously, this alarmed me to the extreme. However, despite me thinking it was possibly a setup, I went with my gut feeling of helping this guy. "Hey, it's going to be okay, man, just calm down. I'm going to call the police for you, just hang tight." That's when he started yelling at me basically. "No help me right now, you don't understand he's going to come back in a few minutes and kill me," he said. I was in a really bad situation as I just wanted to do the right thing. "Okay, I'm coming, where are you?" I asked. "I'm just right ahead, just keep walking straight, I can already see you." My heart was beating at an incomprehensible rate now, even much, so that I'm surprised it didn't pass out. All the things that were crossing my mind sent me into a panic, and I was fully into the woods at this point. I looked ahead after walking for maybe 20 or 30 seconds, and I saw a dark shadow that looked like a person maybe about 30 feet away. "Hey man, is that you?" I asked, but he didn't reply. I sat in silence for a moment while I tried to piece together what the hell was happening. If that was him, or even if it wasn't him, I was in some deep shit because the man I was looking at definitely wasn't tied up to a tree. He was standing up straight and very much alive. In only a moment worth of time, the person started running at me. It was at that exact moment I started backing up, and slowly I eventually snapped out of it and I booked it all the way to my house. Somehow I made it inside before he caught up to me. I shut and locked the sliding glass door behind me, and he was standing right there pulling on the door trying to get it open. He was a very tall but slender looking man with a wolf mask on and one big ass hammer. I barely hesitated and I ran to my room. I know what you're thinking right now too. Why didn't I just defend myself with a bat? Well, originally that was my plan, but shit happens. I don't know. I was absolutely terrified that you would be too if you were in that same situation. I was pacing back and forth in my living room trying my luck with my phone again, but still I had no service. I started having some sort of manic episode and I began screaming and punching my couch. I was extremely angry and I was sick of being the victim. I about ran out there and beat him myself, but I chose a different approach. I waited patiently, and sure enough, after only a minute, he was knocking on my front door. I ran over to the door and I told him, "Come on in, man, see what happens if you step even a single foot in my house. You won't be walking out if you do, that's for sure." He then started laughing. I just kept quiet and I went back to my room. The knocking grew louder and louder, and eventually he started screaming. I had no idea what he was saying, but I think he was mocking me. A few minutes went by of this, and that's when I heard my living room window shatter. I got myself ready and I hid behind my open bedroom door, just waiting for him to walk in. The footsteps got closer and closer as he walked into a few different rooms. Now he was heading to mine. I gripped the bat tighter and said a little prayer. He walked in and I was able to hit him in the head with the bat, and he fell straight to the ground. I hit him a few times while he was down as well to make sure he wasn't getting back up. Anytime soon, and I ran. I ran down the road about 5 or 6 miles to my friend's house. And when I finally got them to answer the door, I briefly explained what happened, and they let me use their phone to call the police. A few police officers were sent to my house and a few officers to my friend's house as well. I then called my parents and they rushed home. They were over 2 hours away though, so it was going to be a while before they made it back. I told the police exactly what happened, and it turned out I had killed him. I didn't know if he was dead or not until the police officer told me. I was worried I was going to be in trouble even though I didn't do anything illegal. It was self-defense. The police took me in for questioning, and since I was a minor at the time, they had to bring my parents in as well. Yes, I killed a man as a teenager, and everything about it has completely changed my life. I've been numb, I've been scared, and I've been anxious. I can't tell you how many nightmares I've had about this whole thing. It's all over now, and this was years ago. Sometimes it feels like it only happened yesterday, and I relive the whole thing. All of the blood, the screaming, and more importantly, my innocence. Before I moved to Indiana with my girlfriend, I lived with my dad on a ranch in the middle of nowhere in a small town called Parkville in Wyoming. Seriously, the town had maybe 50 people in it total, but it was really that small. A measly 25% of the population alone was probably my own family. I have 3 brothers, 1 sister, and well, of course, my dad. My mom passed away from heart disease when I was young, and it really sucked. It really sucks not having her around, as she truly made everything in my life so much better in all of our lives. I had some aunts and uncles and 1 cousin as well that lived near us. I was going to miss them all, but it was time for me to live my own life. After all, I was 20 years old and I had dreams of the city life, and I always wanted to be a veterinarian. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, and I are very close, and we have been since we met. What started out as a long-distance relationship quickly turned into an 8-year marriage so far and still going strong. The first few weeks in Indiana was amazing. Apart from missing my family back home, it really felt like everything was coming together and I was unbelievably happy to say the least. My wife recently just moved into her own house and I moved in with her. She also kind of lived in the country, but barely. It was nowhere near as desolated as my old house was in Wyoming. We were only 5 minutes from the nearest city in Indiana, if that. In Wyoming, my family and I were literally at least 30 minutes away from any store at all. Now, with all the good things that were going on in my life, there was a bit of a problem. You see, the house in Indiana had a long history of sketchy and weirdly horrific horrors and rumors about it. Some of them were true, and not just rumors, but some of them were just flat out fake as hell, and I knew they weren't true. However, before Leslie, my wife, moved into the house, it had been broken into at least 3 or 4 times, all in the time span of 20 years. We only knew about this because of our neighbors, and we definitely believed them. We had no reason not to. Plus, besides that, Leslie told me about how she would see this guy on the property before I moved in at least 3 different times that she was sure of. She had no idea who the guy was though. He only came around during the day. Every time he showed up, apparently, he would stare from the end of the road and then slowly make his way up to the house and up to the window in the kitchen or the dining room and glare inside the house. Every time this happened, Leslie called the police, but they never caught him. He would always be gone by the time the cops made it there. Most of the people who live in rural areas are nice and really sweet old people or just middle-aged parents with a family. But every once in a while you run into a real whack job. The country is a good place to lay low, and unfortunately, there definitely is everybody. A lot of low-life sex offenders or druggies will live out there to try and stay low-key and under their radar from the police or just people in general. I, of course, was very concerned about this guy, and Leslie was deeply terrified of him, understandably. I obviously wasn't scared, but definitely worried. You never know what someone is capable of. Anyways, it would be okay because I had a pump-action shotgun along with a .45 handgun and a revolver, and even at that I had my fair share collection of knives and daggers. I reassured Leslie that everything was going to be okay. Well, one night around 10:30 give or take, we were hanging out in the living room watching a movie, and we were both half asleep. Shockingly, we both wake up to a knock on our front door. It was extremely loud and completely out of the blue, so it jump scared the living heck out of us. I jumped up and ran to our room, and I grabbed my shotgun out of the closet before anything, and I was about ready to lose my cool. I looked out of the blinds first to make sure it was someone we didn't know. We both got a good look at the man, and Leslie confirmed it was the same stranger who had been showing up to the house, unannounced time and time again. The light was off and I couldn't see a thing. I didn't say anything because I didn't want him to know I was right there. I was going to wait for him to come out, but something got a hold of me inside, and I couldn't hold back. I was so pissed off that he was scaring Leslie and him disturbing our night. I was genuinely infuriated. I wasn't going to let him get away with this, even if my life depended on it. I slowly but surely made my way to the door, and I was almost inside now. I took one more step, and now I was directly in the doorframe with my other leg behind me still touching the grass outside. I looked inside and the noise stopped. He must have heard me or noticed me somehow. I went to turn on the light, but of course, the light bulb was out because it wasn't turning on. That's when things went from horrible to much, much worse. Out of nowhere, I heard the man start running towards me, and I stepped back and I couldn't believe it, but I accidentally pulled the trigger. I stood still in disbelief as I couldn't believe what I just did. I didn't hit him, but I'm saying it didn't even seem to scare him. He continued running at me, and I hadn't pumped the shotgun yet after shooting it. At this point, I was probably 10 feet away from the shed, and there he was. We were staring right at each other. I pointed the gun at him, and I told him to leave or I was going to kill him. Do it then, you won't kill me. You're a coward? Then he proceeded to call me every name in the book. Then that's when the police sirens came about in the mere distance, and he knew he was done for. I looked at him with a deceiving smile, and I dropped my shotgun as he tried to run away. I tackled him to the ground, and I put him in a full Nelson, and I held him there until the cops arrived on scene, and I let them do their thing. I'm glad Leslie called the police. I was hoping that's what she was doing because I didn't tell her to. Everything happened so fast, and I was worried she wasn't going to call him, considering the last 3 times. They showed up 30 minutes late each time. Anyways, we're worried that he's going to come back. We have a restraining order on him, but obviously there's really nothing stopping him from coming back if he really wanted to. When he gets out of jail, that is. Or maybe he already is out of jail, I don't know. All I know is that if he does come back, his ass is mine, and next time I won't be so nice. Family comes first, and I won't let anything get in the way of that. Leslie and I are trying to move, but it's a lot easier said than done. She spent just about all of her savings on the down payment of this place, so we're going to have to hang tight for a while.